Welcome. It looks like Monica is getting into the session. I'm getting ready to sit for Monica Gichuhi, who's the moderator of this panel. It looks like Monica, can you see and hear us okay?
Oh, she's there? Okay.
She's not. While Monica works on her sound and video, I'm going to go ahead and introduce this panel so that the conversation can begin. And then by then, I would imagine Monica will have straightened out her audio and video. So right now, what we're going to discuss is craft code and artisanal mining assessment, growing, modifying, and morphing. And as I mentioned in the first session of the day today, all of these certification schemes have pros and cons. And they fit different sizes of businesses and different, and they work sometimes differently in different businesses because of their different government regulations and structures and protocols. So there is no perfect certification schema. What we have is a lot of imperfect certification schemas, which is better than no certification schemas. And so what we're going to do today is familiarize you more with the craft code and some of the vagaries of the craft code. So our moderator for today is Monica Gichuhi, and I see we're still having a hard time getting people online. So I'll introduce who is on this panel while we still sort that out. So I see Pauline Mundia. She's she was at her desk and then she walked away. She is the manager of the Farmer Communication Outreach Project. We have Charles Douglas Hamilton, who's a consultant with the World Bank Energy and Extractives Global Practice. We have Patience Singo. And Patience, I'm looking for your title because as I mentioned, I am pinch hitting here. Patience is with Virtu Gem, but also has expertise in this area beyond the Virtu Gem initiative. And we still don't have Monica. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is check to see. Pauline, are you able to get your audio on yet?
Please, I'm on.
Very good. And do we have Monica? Looks like no. Okay, so Patience, let's get started while we sort of straighten out some of the technical difficulties. Patience, could you start with an overview of craft code so people know what it is, and then we'll launch into the questions?
Okay, thanks. Let me put up a presentation. I'll just present a few slides.
Huh?
Okay. All right. I'll give a short presentation on the craft code. This is a code that was a code for compliance and access to to formal markets, which was developed by the Alliance for Responsible Mining arm, of course, in conjunction with a variety of stakeholders. So what exactly is the craft code? As I said, craft stands for a code for risk mitigation. For ASM engaging in formal trade. It really supports the ASM sector, especially the lower level, the lower level ASM, to fulfill the requirements to access responsible international markets. I think I should say that prior to the craft code, a number of initiatives were developed. For example, Fair Minds, Fair Trade Gold, and a host of other standards. And it was understood that these standards had sort of higher level of compliance and could not kind of adequately fit to the need of the small scale miners. Therefore, craft was defined and developed. It actually complies with responsible supply chain requirements, such as the OECD due diligence guidance, as well as market expectation. So it really does have a great sort of compliance and really pays attention to a lot of the requirements by the market, including the Annex 2 risk of the OECD due diligence guidance. And as well, it provides guidance to to the ASM producers to be able to implement responsible mining practices. So it does have a balance between market expectations and what the ASM producer needs to do in order to improve practices as well as comply with market expectations. So the key features are, of course, it applies to different groups of miners. It can be implemented by individuals, cooperatives, associations, etc. It also applies to different levels of miners' formalization and operational capacity. So it can apply to to miners that are in the progress towards formalization, to those that are fully formalized, those that are undergoing registration and stuff like that. So it has this diversity and application to different types of mining. Of course, it does have stringent compliance to the OECD due diligence guidance, for example, aspects around human rights, aspect around armed groups and stuff like that. So it really provides that assurance to the market and downstream actors that whatever their sourcing, which has been produced under craft, has not contributed to any human rights issues. Of course, it then does require the miners to assess their own compliance to the code and communicate that to stakeholders through a craft report, as well as it does not require the miners to conduct due diligence. So in terms of cost, the miners are not required to conduct due diligence, but only the craft report is adequate. And what are the proposed benefits of the craft code? Of access to formal markets with clear and transparent trade agreements, increased incomes due to access to markets, improved performance of the sector because it does promote improved progress in safety, health, and gender inclusivity. And of course, it does have an impact on the quality of life around ASM communities due to its requirements. So craft is a first step towards responsible mining. Yeah. Thank you. This is the overview.
All right, that was a great overview. Do you want to close that presentation? Is that what you're looking for, Patience?
Yeah. Okay, stop. Yeah, I found it. Thank you.
Got it. Monica, are you able to see and hear us at this point?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Would you like to pick it up from here and I'll stay in the background in case you need me?
Okay, fair enough. Apologies for that. Technological challenges. Good to see everyone. Thanks for stepping in to start the session. I believe we've finished with the introductions. Thank you, Patience, for the introduction. Mama Pauline, kindly mute yourself. Thank you. Just nod between Patience and Charles that Andrea had finished with the introduction, so we don't need to redo that. We just continue with the session. All right. Okay. And Charles was able to give an overview about Not Yet. So we started with the Patience, just delving in to explain what craft is and what are the benefits proposed by craft in implementing them for ASM, right? So then let's revert back to Charles. Thank you, Patience, for the overview about what craft code is and how we are endeavoring to implement and cascade the same to ASM miners through the Virtu Gem program. Then, so at this point, I'm going to ask Charles, over COVID period, the World Bank actually introduced around 2 rounds of grants under the EGPS program, whose aim was to come in and step in and elevate the suffering of the artisanal miners, and all the disruption that COVID had caused. And in the first small grants, it was about working at grassroots level. And the second grant, you actually went a step further to the grantees and asked anybody willing to apply for that grant and working with ASMs should take the ASMs through some form of certification and standards for extra benefits. So Charles, if you could maybe tell us from the World Bank perspective, a bit of background about your grants and why the World Bank deemed it necessary to take ASM miners through some form of certification and standardization in the second round of granting.
Thank you, Monica. Good morning, Chicago. Let me give you some background just before I come into looking at what we've done with EGPS grants. But last year in 2020, after the breakout of COVID, we were very alarmed by how vulnerable informal communities around the world who are involved in mining may be impacted by the crisis. And so a global data initiative was conducted between the months of between May, June, and July of 2020 to basically assess the impacts of COVID on those artisanal mining communities. The World Bank partnered with 17 organizations and worked in 22 countries in order to understand how these how miners in mine sites in specific locations were impacted along several lines. And based on the outcomes of that study, the donors for the EGPS Trust Fund, which is under the World Bank, supported an emergency response window to aid artisanal mining communities who have been impacted by COVID. And as part of that, we've had different rounds of grants that are focused on a variety of different activities. But the ultimate objective of those grants is to build resilience in artisanal mining communities to negative impacts from COVID and other shocks, so that there is going to be much more resilient communities in those mining districts. And why is this relevant? It's relevant because there's 40 million people who work in mine sites around the world as artisanal miners. And if you take their beneficiaries, people who benefit from them, that could be more than 100 million people. You're looking at maybe 2% of the global population. And this is a very significant number. I think a lot of these miners work in relatively hazardous conditions. They often aren't in the formal economy. They often don't have access to international markets and end up taking prices from middlemen domestically who often don't give them fair prices. They work extremely hard, and some of the work they do, some of the mines they work in are extremely detrimental to the environment. There's a lot of social issues involved in some of these communities. And so we do care about this because when you've got so many people working in mining, it is a livelihood. In many of these rural communities, there's no other source of income. So the EGPS response to help these artisanal mining communities impacted by COVID has helped alleviate some of these issues. And really that is where we're at with this project, where the bank through the EGPS Trust Fund is supporting Virtu Gem, and that's really where we're here today talking about craft.
Thank you, Charles, and certainly thank you to the World Bank as well for stepping in at a very dire moment when there was a lot of disruption of the supply chain. That saw a lot of suffering, especially from producing countries where minerals were not flowing anymore. That meant there was no money to buy the basics. So it was a timely intervention by the World Bank and certainly very appreciated. And in that same breath, I would like now to introduce Mama Pauline. Mama Pauline, both you and I were having technical challenges, so don't worry, settle in. We came in at the same time. It's evening in Africa and on a Saturday, so of course everybody was up and down and just settling in into this forum, so bear with us. Mama Pauline doesn't need a lot of introduction to most people. Mama Pauline is a seasoned artisanal miner of many years and a gem miner, gem trader herself. Mama Pauline has been the organizing secretary of the Association of Women in Mining in Zambia. She currently serves as the vice president of the Federation of Artisanal Miners in Zambia as well. holds very many titles, works a lot with the government, women, and the artisans in Zambia. And she also serves as a coordinator of Virtu in Zambia. And Mama Pauline has had the pleasure of introducing these craft codes. First, understanding what craft codes are herself as a miner, as a coordinator, and then she has the task of going out to the mine sites to try explain the same to the miners in Zambia. She is currently trying to work with 4 mine sites that we are sourcing from in Zambia. She'll tell us about these 4 mine sites, what they mine. And Mama Pauline, what we want to do is for you to paint for us a picture. How does it look like? How are the miners, what's a miner's perception of a craft? Do they understand what you're trying to explain to them? You being a miner yourself, and Patience has been your teacher for the last couple of months about craft code. How is that going? Just from experience, yours and that of the miners that we are working with, the 4 sites. Just tell us how that's going on and how artisans are working and they're taking in the craft codes.
Thank you very much. But then I think to start with, I just want to appreciate the World Bank that through Virtu, Zambia, the Zambian ASM has actually benefited, especially, being exposed to international markets through this COVID period. And now the craft code that has been introduced to Zambia. So we are so grateful. Now back to your question, Monica. Craft code is something that is new. Even to me, it was new. But then the first time that I heard about craft code and what's all about, I was easy to really understand it because some of the issues are actually related to the management of the environment in our operations as artisanal small-scale miners. So that was the direction that I actually used to talk to the 4 mines that have been identified, and we have identified 4, and of which 3 are actually females and 1 is a male. So out of the 3 female, we have got 1 female artisanal and small-scale miner in the famous emerald mining area, which is on the Copper Belt, and then there's 1 in the famous amethyst mining area in Southern Province, and then we have 1 also in Lundazi, and a gentleman who is in the Eastern Province in Nyimba. So at first it was not easy, but then when I mean, I was actually encouraging to say, when you are part of the craft code, it means that you have a window or a door to access responsible investors and also responsible market. So that excited them, and they were really geared to become part of the craft code. But then with the Zambian scenario, it has been something that really has been very impressive. I've been working with the artisanal and small-scale miners because from the Virtu interviews, when we did the assessment, that was when we did the verification. It was actually it was marrying with the Virtu assessment. So what we found out was that most of them, all of them actually do not employ children or child labor. It's not there. And they're doing their mining legally because they've got the licenses, though some of them are in the process of getting licenses, and those that are in the process of getting license are those that have not yet obtained the approval of the environmental project brief, which is a requirement for anyone to have a mining license issued. And then we also found out on the ground that most of them pay tax, and then also there's no money laundering. And then the other thing is that they have good relationship with the community, and the and also some employ women, but then on the issue of women, that is actually where the problem is. 3 out of the 4, only 3 have got women that are employed and are involved in the sorting and grading of the gemstones. But then the other 3 mines, they only have men, or the few women that they employ seasonally. Those, they use them just to do some cleaning or drawing of water. So the craft code is something that I've not only shared with the artisanal and small-scale miners, but then I've gone to the extent of sharing it with the government, the mine safety department, which is part of the Mines and Minerals Ministry, and they have actually appreciated, and they were even saying that it would be a good idea if this craft code could actually filter to the whole artisanal sub-sector in Zambia, because they would like the artisanal in Zambia to practice good, to have good mining practices in their operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mama Pauline. Certainly, I can see the classes the patients has been giving, the assessments, and the language is, you know, we are starting to speak the craft language. And patients, I hope you're proud when you hear Mama Pauline talk about some of the assessment criteria that you've been belaboring to make them understand. Patients, you've had I mean, that's just Zambia. We have Malawi, we have Kenya. We are working with artisans in very remote areas. Language barrier. We are working virtually with infrastructure issues as well, trying to get them to understand, and we're doing this via Zoom. It's been quite quite the journey. But then patients, that brings me to the next question I wanted then to ask. Having been that you're an expert in many other standards, you've done craft in many other locations and in different countries and in different setup of artisanal miners. These standards tend to be developed from a top-down approach. And the people who develop the standard, in your opinion, are they contextualized to the situation like you've seen where we are sort of deploying them, and the people who are supposed to be complying with them given their levels and where they are, you know, is a standards approach very top down? What should be at what point should we have artisans input into standards development? How do we move them from just being recipients of an already developed standard to being involved, you know, in developing, understanding them better, so that by the time it's coming to implementation, they more or less understand what the market is looking for? Can you reflect along these lines, and given the challenges we're experiencing with the current level?
Okay, Monica, thank you. I think it's a difficult question. I will try to do justice to it. And perhaps I should say that I will not address this in the context of craft, but as you said, in the context of standards in general. I don't want to have enemies after this call. Anyway, yeah, look, I think, you know, there's a big debate on the relevance and applicability of standards to ASM operations. And I think it's a fact that the standards, codes, or guidelines, whatever you call it, you know, they are important to both, the downstream as well as to the miners. I think let's not, undermine that fact. So they are very important. They provide assurance to the market that, you know, these minerals are produced in a good way, with respect to human rights standards and all that. And also, they provide that access to markets for the miners, and as well as guide, you know, the miners towards, you know, responsible practices. I think we should know that a lot of these miners do have national guidelines, national standards on safety and all that, but rarely do the miners take this seriously, nor do they have the capacity to do that. So the standards comes in as an additional sort of stick or incentive, so to speak. But however, the concern is that these standards usually come on a top-down approach. And more specifically, you know, they have these requirements and specifications, which however, in my own opinion, do not address or understand, you know, the ASM ecosystem. Now, the ASM ecosystem, as I understand it, with a lot of miners that I've worked with, is for a miner, they want to be supported in production. They want immediate access to finance. They want immediate access to markets. They have a lot of formalization complexities. They deal with local authorities. They are challenging. Now, when they are in the midst of this whole frying pan and they are trying to deal with these issues that matter to them sort of immediately, then there are standards that come with a lot of requirements, compliance issues, and all that. So in a lot of cases, the miners tend to then not see, you know, the relevance, the immediate relevance of the standards to their immediate needs, but rather they would want the standards to be part of the process of their development and addressing their immediate needs. I think that's one of the big issues here. So when the standards do not put into consideration these factors, which matter most to the miners, somehow it just does not work. And I think this is the reason why that a lot of the standards do work, because there's a third actor. Either there's a development project, you know, like the World Bank is assisting, and it stands to be seen that after this grant, will the miners continue implementing these standards or not, for example? Yeah, so I've seen that a lot of these successes happen because there's a third actor that is then supporting the miners. But beyond that, either miners go back to their, way of doing business. So the big questions are, what are the miners' interests? How can the miners be supported in their priority issues? For example, I think I've already mentioned those issues already. And it is important as well, as we look into standards, to underline that the ASM sector is not homogeneous. For example, Mama Pauline is painting a very good picture about Zambia. You know, they are all formalized. They're all having women and inclusivity. But when you go to Kenya, Kenya or Malawi, it's a different picture. Right. So there's issue of the ASM is not homogeneous by organization, by country, by commodity, and there's a host of other things. So you find that eventually it's a small segment that really can sort of implement the standards. They are able to see immediate value of these standards. And this segment of the ASM sector are those that have capacity for production. They've kind of close proximity to the market. They can easily, you know, sell their products to the markets, and they get that value. But the majority of the ASMers, to be honest with you, standards are another pile of requirements that are there, and they don't really relate with them, right? Yeah. So the other issue to underline is that the way the ASM sector works is that those that are close to the miners, provide them productivity, are at the mine gate to buy their minerals, are the ones that have a greater influence. So the standards comes as a secondary, because the standards is just coming with requirements. It's not coming with any support, for example. So for the miner, it's about, after my sweat today, I want to sell my mineral, my gold. And who's there? If tomorrow I've got water, I need a pump. Who's going to support me? Is the person that is buying using the standards going to support me with a pump? If the person is not there for me with a pump, I would rather go with the guy with a pump and I continue with my production. So these are some of the issues that, when you look at the standards, they are not there, but this is what drives ASM, for example. And then I would say, and I did mention this. So the issue of this, I think standards need legs. Right now, I would say, they have borrowed legs, because we, for example, in the craft, we've what we call a craft scheme, or we've got a third party that is supporting, but they need, as they are developed, a system that can support the standards to be implemented by the miners, help them to confirm. So to answer your question, Monica, how can the miners be involved. I think standards needs to be piloted. I think a rigorous piloting exercise needs to happen in different contexts, and then the results out of the piloting are then feed into standards development so that they are relevant and applicable to the miners. Then there needs to be a greater engagement between the downstream actor who, I would say, benefit from the standard and the miner. As I speak, there's a lot of third actors who are like the middlemen, right? It's like there's a standard is developed, is put in there, and somebody expects the standard to be, or rather the standard to sanitize the production. But I think there needs to be a greater engagement between those that are interested in the production and the miners, and to educate the miners on what is important to the market. And I think that is important. And obviously, I think the miners need to be engaged much more through their associations, through their leadership, not through experts like me. I think in a lot of this development, they call Patience, they call Monica. These are the ASM experts. And then we speak on behalf of the miners. It doesn't work. Mama Pauline is there. Others are there. Let the miners be on the table and really communicate what matters to them and what is important. With this, thank you. I hope it's okay, Monica.
Thank you, Patience. Thank you for that candid reflection. And I think at times we need to be able to address this so that there's then improvement with other organizations that are thinking about future further standards. And standards are always being revised for relevance. Standards are always being relooked at. And I think this kind of feedback, especially because we are deploying these standards firsthand, is relevant to the various bodies that develop the standards. And you brought up very critical issues. That is something we experience. For instance, in Kenya, when we're looking for sites to deploy, these issues came up. The miners wanted to know, if I do the standard, are you going to give me capital? You know, if I go through the standardization, what are the quantities of sales that I'm being assured? Because they were seeing it as it's extra work, but what is its benefit? What is its immediate value? And I think, Patience, you've really brought that up very well. And I want to congratulate the coordinators at this point. They really did a good job at understanding, internalizing, and really being able to articulate the same to really bring the miners on board. And I saw, I think, the fact that Virtu Gem being a marketplace sort of also was an incentive where you're telling them, by doing this, we are actually bringing you closer to this group of sort of buyers who want to see these sort of due diligence guidelines outlined. And when we're actually discussing this panel with Susan, the conference organizer, I had actually suggested to her and said, we needed one more panelist. We needed a downstream player to join this panel. One of the jewelers, one of the buyers who, buy from craft certified mines should have joined to also just give because we have the upstream player, we should have also had the downstream voice to join in and tell us, how do they see it and what is their role in working together with the miners to just answer each other as panelists. And I hope some of these things will come up as the questions go by. But to move ahead, Charles, Mama Pauline brought up something. She said when she's implementing this in Zambia, she went further and spoke to their government, and the government said, this is good, and we should actually have many more miners going through this kind of certification and standardization when she explained this to their government. And this also is reflecting on what Patience has brought up on sustainability of these standards. Who bears the costs of this certification? At the point where EGPS doesn't give us further granting as Virtu Gem, and we have 8 mines we have started with. We have more miners asking, where were we left behind, And you don't have to have the absolute answer, Charles. I just want you to reflect upon it. Who ideally is supposed to pay the cost of this standardization, and how do we make the implementation more sustainable?
Monica, that's a very challenging question, and it's a very good question. It's very, very important. The sustainability of standards and their implementation is something that gets questioned a lot, and we can understand why. There's a number of reasons for that. Ultimately, longer term, the mines are going to have to absorb that cost. And this then brings into question what type of mines are actually suitable for these sorts of standards. If you've got a, let's say, a high margin product, let's say you've got a combination of stones that come out, but you've got some very special high value stones, you might have significant value within a certain number of stones that you can sell. That value there can be worth an awful lot. If you have a very low value product, you have to ship a large volume. And of course, that involves capital expenditures and other things. So these are going to be very different approaches to how you would actually cover the costs of, let's say, a standard. Because, you know, if you have a low value product and you don't have much production, then it's going to be very difficult to cover the costs of compliance. If you have a differentiated product, which you can brand and get brand value for and export, there could be something quite special there. If you take a mainstreaming approach, let's say for gold, then the question is, if you want to scale up, how do you do it? Because everything really in the supply chains for gold or gemstones is built on trust. Trust is critical. Relationships are critical. And this comes back to one of the Patience's points. I think we need to have really deep levels of engagement right across the supply chain, from the downstream all the way up to the upstream to the miners, so that miners understand what the downstream need in order for them to comply with regulations in other countries. And that information often is lost. We don't have those direct forums where people can meet. With technology, sure, it's changing, but I think it's very, very important that we increase the level and the depth of engagement across the supply chain. And I think government's got a role here to play as well. I mean, ultimately, what we're looking with standards is we're looking at trying to professionalize mines. We're trying to formalize. We're trying to give a better life to those miners so that they can operate in a more responsible manner, both from a socially and environmental perspective. And also to earn greater income, which would be good for poverty alleviation. In so doing, you know, we've got to identify who can actually help facilitate this. Governments have to be the facilitator, and they can do this by two ways. They can remove barriers to formalization, and they can also incentivize miners to formalize. And these are slightly different. Taking away barriers to formalization may be, for example, the exorbitant cost of getting a license or even registering as an artisanal miner. You know, sometimes it takes a long time to get these documents signed off and approved. Sometimes it can take more than a year or 2 years to get a license approved for a piece of ground where you've got actual security of tenure to the ground. You know, this is not going to help bring people in from the informal economy. You've got potential role of industry here. You know, the coexistence models that are going on in Latin America for gold, some of those are very, very interesting. You've got information and knowledge transfer from those companies into cooperatives. You've got a number of different types of transaction that have been structured. And I think that there is a lot that industry can do to help build on these standards to help, you know, build capacity of, let's say, cooperatives in order to use a toll milling processing plant or to use a centralized processing plant around various different areas that they're operating in. You know, and I think miners also need to understand that there are other people who have needs. And I think everyone down the supply chain needs to understand everyone's needs. My concern is with what's going on at the moment in terms of, you know, COP26, the discussions there about, you know, supply chains, ESG. There's a lot more scrutiny coming into looking at supply chains, not just from an emissions reduction perspective, but also from, you know, questioning, you know, everything to do with those supply chains. One thing we must avoid is having a stigma for ASM, because ASM provides a livelihood for so many people. But what we've got to do is find a way where we can get those people to work in ASM in a responsible manner. And that is a challenge. And coming back to your question about standards and sustainability, we need to work together. We need to increase engagement, and we need to pilot projects to work out what we can learn from different approaches. And I believe that there are different approaches, but ultimately, longer term, mines have to pay for the compliance costs for these standards. And some of those mines are not going to be commercially viable to do so. They're not going to generate enough revenue. So that is something that in ASM we have to understand, and we're being realistic. You know, a lot of these projects are not going to generate enough to cover costs of compliance to certain standards.
Charles, I was going to, just as a continuation, allow me to to what you're saying about eventually mines will have to bear the cost, and what Patient said about they're not seeing the immediate value yet in implementing those standards, you know. And so where does collaboration here come in with the downstream, with the market? Because the market is the one actually who is pushing for this standardization. The market is the one that wants this assurance. And we have the OECD call that, and we all keep saying we have to keep engaging and working with the artisan miners, you know. So where does collaboration come in? Does the market continue to just sit as downstream players, wait for ASM to grapple with all these issues, pay for standardization in order to access them? Where does collaboration and partnership come in? How could we incentivize them to also cost share with some of the mines that are, you know, producing some of these gemstones? And is that a feasible option as well?
Yeah, I think in response to that question, Monica, I think there's something that's forgotten here about there is an incredible opportunity. It's a business opportunity for downstream purchasers and buyers to get into ASM. And, you know, there's an awful lot that can be done. There's two reasons for this. One is a financial business decision. It could be a profitable enterprise. But secondly, from an ESG perspective, this could be very, very positive, because if you do it in the right way, you funnel money through right down to the miners and the mine sites, and if they're responsibly managed and mined, you know, this is a very, very good reflection on business. And I think that what we're going to see is we're going to see certain businesses understand this. But I think we need to promote the fact that there are opportunities here. So ESG presents risks to ASM globally, but it also presents opportunities. And I think we need to look at how we can harness those opportunities.
Thank you, Charles, for that. Mama Pauline, allow me to bring you back into this conversation. As an ASM miner yourself, you're speaking to miners about these crafts. You're also grappling with trying to understand what it is Patience is teaching you. How practical is it? Are miners seeing what we are trying to do for them? Are they seeing the eventual benefit? You know, and how does the process look? How is it, you know, as you engage with these 4 miners? And I know we've actually had cases of some miners we started with who have come back and you know, sort of dropped out, and we've had to onboard new mines. So it's been a challenge. It's not all smooth, and we've been very candid with the World Bank wherever this happens to tell them we need to change mines. This has happened, you know. So just take us through that. What has been the, you know, the feedback from the miners? Are they seeing what we're trying to tell them, and the immediate benefits?
And I think I have to be truthful on that one, Monica. On the issue of benefits, that has been the main question. What am I going to benefit? But then, as I said much earlier, that markets is really a challenge. And maybe I have to say that in Zambia, really there's no market mechanism, you know, so that at least the ASM are able to sell their product. So when Virtu Gem came up and everybody was excited that at least they will be able to sell the little production that they have, though our disappointment has been that there have been few women that are able to meet the is it the standard Or is it the demand? Because everybody wants to buy something that is beautiful, you know, the highest grade, and most of our women, you know, haven't been able, you know, to to meet that grade of gemstones that are on demand. So as a result, it has been more men. So their excitement about craft code is accessing market. But now the question is, how many of our women really have the quality that is on demand? So we've been assuring them to say, whatever you are producing, as long as you are able to meet the other conditions of not employing child, not having child labor, and no money laundering, I mean, the other things, you definitely you have the market to be introduced to market. But then in general, the issue of implementation has been a bit of a challenge, as you are aware. I agree with what Charles has spoken, that most of the artisanal miners, you know, the activity, I would say, is poverty driven. So as such, some of the requirements or the guidelines, you know, have been, I can see a bit of a challenge, you know, in complying to them, like the issues of the personal protective equipment. That is an issue, because when we visited these mines, like when we visited the Emerald mine, all the workers had hats, they had working suits, and then they had the boots, but then they did not have the earplugs and the hammers, because of, you know, there they do a lot of explosives and a lot of drilling. So that is a challenge, you know, because it affects their ears. And then the other mines, like in Southern Province, where there were a lot of women, most of the women did not have any protective equipment on them. So when we spoke to them to say that this is a requirement, because, you know, you have to be mindful of the safety of your workers, and therefore you have to provide the PPE for them. But then most of them will say, no, we don't have the capacity to do that. See, so that is where the issue of implementation in case of mine safety, personal safety for the workers, I mean, is concerned. But then the other issues, like maybe having a register of workers, that has not been a problem, because most of them have that. And also the issue of having mine safety policies or plans in place. They are willing to help them, because they say that they cannot have anything written down, but if a craft code can help them, they will definitely put into practice. And also the issue of having, you know, the labor policy is something that is written, because even when they employ their workers, no, there's no written contracts. Everything is just verbal. So, but then they are willing to comply to that. But then the major issue has been the PPEs for their workers, because they say, no, it is costly. I know, yes, it is costly, because the full gear, definitely it is costly, and most of our SM cannot afford. But then other issues like policies, they are willing to adhere to that. But then their really concern is also being exposed to responsible investors, because there have been so many cases whereby some of these so-called investors would have some temporal marriages, working together with them. And then within a short time, that arrangement will just disappear. So it is a concern to them to say, but then how can we graduate from being from being small or to medium if one, there is no market mechanism, and two, there's also nowhere where we can get financial help. So these two issues are really a problem. But then we just hope that somehow there might be a solution. And then if I can just take you back to what Charles, Patience was saying about standards. Standards is something that is a bit of a problem. It might take long. The process have to be gradual, but then to expect something that will just take off and, scale up, something that can be visible immediately is a bit of a problem, because we tried it in Zambia, wanted to come up with standards on the gemstones, and they were saying that we should adopt the GIA. How do you adopt the GIA standards when most of, even the gemstone institution in Dola is not even affiliated to GIA? And then we don't even have a gemological institute in Zambia. So it's not really possible. Then are we going to have Zambian standards? If we have Zambian standards, are the Zambian standards going to be accepted on the international market? Because that has been the question. See, because what we think is the A grade on the international market, they are using the GIA, the Gemological Institute of America. What would be 3 A's to Zambia? There maybe to be 1 A. So already, that is a challenge. So I agree that there is need to formalize, but then also the barriers of, formalization in Zambia, and the biggest challenge is the cost of having an environmental project brief, because you need to engage a consultant, but then how many ASM are able to pay for a consultant? And also you need to pay for the logistics for the mine safety department to visit your area just to assess what is on the ground. That is also a cost. And then the actual submission fee for the EPB is quite high, because when you really analyze it, you find that the cost of a mining license, it is 1/4. See, it's 1/4 of, compared to the cost of just the submission of an EPB. So that has been a barrier, and in the past years, the EPB was not a requirement, but then of course recently it has been a global demand that ASM should also manage their environment in their areas of operation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mama Pauline. And we are just about to wind up. Time for our session is, we have 2 minutes. I had requested the audience to share any question and ask any questions. I see some comments, are not really questions. So the panelists, I hope you've been reading them along as they've been coming in from the audience. But I think I see the issue of how do we incentivize ASM, to take up these standards. And it's also something we've reflected about. I see a link share from one of the participants on shared value of compliance, shared cost of compliance, something that we're trying to ask, how then do we get downstream players to also cost share in this? And with 2 minutes, I wonder if any of my panelists have any last comments before we we sign off? Patience, Charles, do you want any parting shots for half a minute before it's closed out?
Yeah, I could go quickly if you don't mind. I think that we need to engage everybody, and we need to look at what's not working. And we have been doing that, but we need to do it really seriously now. And we need to get the private sector involved, and we need to get government involved, because when government starts to cut back on some of the barriers to entry to formalization, when industry is there at the table, when you've got traders and buyers, the miners can understand the needs of the downstream can understand the realities on the ground. And I think this is going to be very important.
Yeah, I should say, okay.
Go.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So probably 2 points. I think alignment is very important, alignment of the standards to the needs. Secondly, I think we just need to be real with ourselves. Do a calculation of how much dollars have been invested to create a compliance to a standard, and how much has been the benefit to the miner out of those dollars. But what I'm trying to say is, like I said, standards need legs, but there's been a lot of external support to create compliance. But is that worth it? Is that sustainable? Can it continue? I don't know.
Thank you, Patience. And further to your 26 questions, I'd also say, how do we incorporate country level or miners to also be input into some of the thinking of those standards, so that we're able to contextualize them to the realities of the people who are supposed to be implementing these standards. So they stop also just being recipients, but are also able to almost dictate some of the things that go into these standards, to ensure their suitability. Patience, Charles, Mama Pauline, thank you very much. Thank you for participating today. Thank you for sharing your experience, vast, experience, your wisdom as well, and being very candid as we reflected upon this implementation of standards to Gemstone ASM, and using Virtu Gem as a case study of the success of the same. It's still a process. It's still ongoing. We are piloting it. None of us has the answers yet. I think at the end of this support from the World Bank, we'll have a lot of data to analyze and see what's the change narrative, what can be done better, and use it to maybe shape, how best could some of these things be implemented. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And thank you to all the audience who joined us today. Apologies for the hiccups at the beginning, but all is well that ends well. Thank you very much and have a good weekend ahead.
Thank you.